Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. We are jumping straight into a deeply personal and honestly an incredibly relatable journey. We're going to unpack a beautifully raw, authentic audio diary that captures a struggle I think almost all of us have faced at one point or another. You know that feeling of being just completely, utterly stuck? And more importantly, we're looking at the active steps it takes to actually break free from that feeling. We're breaking down this source material to uncover a practical, everyday toolkit for finding real mental clarity. It's an explainer all about going from feeling trapped inside your own head to finally finding that sense of forward momentum. So get comfortable and let's jump right into the mind of our speaker. Our source actually begins on this gorgeous, sunny, warm summer day. But internally, the weather is a whole different story. The speaker makes this raw admission, saying, "I've sunk a bit into this state, into a swamp of thoughts." It's such an honest realization, and it perfectly nails how jarring it can be when the world outside is so bright and vibrant, but your internal world feels entirely bogged down. It's this heavy mental weight that completely contradicts the sunshine. The speaker notes they literally can't find a better word for it than a swamp. So, let's break down this idea of the swamp. Obviously, we're not talking about a physical place here. It's a heavy, totally static psychological state. When you're in the swamp, you aren't actively sinking, but you sure aren't moving forward either. You're just suspended in this thick mire of overthinking and unease. According to our source, this state is actively fueled by your own brain and nervous system, just relentlessly tossing up doubtful, anxious, and less than positive thoughts. It's essentially a state of being mentally trapped by your own internal defense mechanisms. Now, to really grasp why our brains do this, we need to look at the context. 5. That's 5 long years. That is how long the speaker notes they've been operating under continuous, unrelenting stress. When you endure that level of prolonged tension, it fundamentally changes how you process the world around you. The speaker acknowledges that because of this crazy timeline, their brain naturally resists relaxing. It just defaults right back to fear and anxiety. It's a defense mechanism. The swamp is basically the accumulated result of half a decade of the nervous system being on high alert. Tool 1. Speaking out loud. Because this explainer isn't just about spotting the problem, right? It's about the tools you can actually use to escape it. The speaker has developed this daily habit of self-therapy to combat this exact state. And the contrast here is brilliant. For our speaker, traditional journaling feels like a trap. Staring at a blank piece of paper, that just invites more overthinking. And honestly, we've all been there, trying to draft the perfect diary entry only to give up after 2 sentences. But vocalizing, simply speaking your thoughts out loud, acts as an immediate release valve. The speaker describes it as instantly liberating. It physically clears the head and unloads the brain. It's a completely frictionless alternative to keeping a psychological diary.
Moving right along to Tool 2, the Gratitude Antidote.
Now, even when you unload your brain by speaking out loud, those negative thoughts, they still try to sneak back in. When the nervous system starts feeding the speaker those anxious, doubtful thoughts we talked about earlier, they deploy a really specific, immediate counterattack. The speaker calls these anxious spirals thoughts with a minus sign. To stop them in their tracks, they use active neutralization. When they feel themselves sinking back into the swamp, they literally catch themselves and say out loud, "No, no, no." They actively halt the spiral. And then they immediately replace that minus sign with a plus. How? Through a deeply conscious, intentional application of gratitude. It's not just some passive feeling. It is a highly active weapon against the swamp. And the sheer simplicity of these chosen pillars is exactly what makes them so powerful. We're talking about safety, personal health, and the health of loved ones. When the brain tries to panic about the abstract future or the lingering stress of the past 5 years, the speaker anchors themselves right here, right now in the present moment, with these absolute fundamental truths. By deeply acknowledging and truly feeling grateful for these core elements, they completely neutralize the anxiety. It literally strips the power right away from the fear. And that brings us to Tool 3, the Travel Reset. If speaking out loud unloads the brain and gratitude shuts down the anxiety, then a change of scenery is like the ultimate antidote to the swamp. Our source describes travel not just as a fun leisure activity, but as a hard reboot for a tired, bogged-down brain. You might think a mental reset requires a month-long retreat to some remote island, but the reality is way more accessible. 4. It only takes about 4 hours on a train for this speaker to feel the mental reset truly kick in. Even just a one-day trip begins the process of shifting their mindset. But that 4-hour mark in transit, that's where the magic really starts to happen, where those heavy files in the brain finally start to delete themselves. So how exactly does travel pull off this mental healing? It actually follows a very specific sequence. First,
You have to physically leave your familiar space, your house, your usual four walls where all your stress lives. Second, while in transit, the speaker actively observes. They watch new people, they study unfamiliar landscapes. This actively pulls them out of their own head. And third, something truly fascinating happens. By looking at the outside world, they are able to look back at their own life from the outside. Problems that felt totally impossible back home are suddenly reevaluated from a completely new, healthier angle. They can mentally organize and analyze situations with stunning clarity, just by being in motion.
The speaker actually shares a really specific dream about this. To permanently break out of the swamp, their ultimate goal isn't just taking a vacation. It's traveling with purpose. They dream of going to a new place specifically for a professional reason, or maybe to try a brand new hobby. Combining the physical movement of travel with a clear, engaging purpose would, in their own words, give them new strength and essentially allow them to feel reborn.
Finally, we reach the last phase, waiting for the nudge.
So, we've talked about coping internally with vocalizing and gratitude and using the physical world to hit reset through travel. But ultimately, escaping the swamp requires looking outward. And there's this beautiful vulnerability in the speaker's reflection here. Because despite having all these incredible self-help tools, they admit they are still just waiting for a sign, a little nudge, a tiny push from the universe or from God, to finally activate that forward momentum. They aren't asking to be catapulted forward at lightning speed, they just want a small nudge to add some color back to their life, to point them in a fresh direction so they can finally step permanently out of that static swamp.
It's a deeply moving reflection, and honestly, it forces us all to take a look in the mirror. We all have our own swamps. We all have our periods of being totally stuck in our own thoughts. But you have the tools now. Speaking out loud, practicing radical gratitude, and changing your physical perspective. So I want to leave you with this final crucial thought. Think about your own journey from stuck to unstuck. What small nudge from the universe are you waiting for today to add color back into your life? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep moving, and I'll catch you next time.